Good morning, warriors. Good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world watching today. It is day 3 of 5 days of lives. So I will give this a few seconds, a minute or so, to let people join me live. So just like the other days, I will share my thoughts about self-love. And then at the end, we'll respond to questions and comments. So please let me know that you're here. Welcome, everybody. Since this is in the closed group, I'm not going to name names for privacy reasons because I will be sharing this on YouTube as well. So welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining me on this Wednesday morning. Hi, good to see you all. Excited to have you here. So, excuse me. How are you doing? I'm going to give this just a little bit more time because I know it can take a little bit for notifications to get out there and for people to join. So, how are you doing this morning? Have you been watching the lives this week? I know that they're not planned too far ahead, so it might be hard to find time to connect with us when we're live. But have you been watching? I know all the stuff that I've talked about before, even today's topic. While I don't know that I've specifically talked about or done a video on self-love per se, some of the things I'm going to talk about today, I have talked about, but probably in a different context. So it will be kind of interesting to see how things come out today. Because I just go with it. I don't script anything. That just does not work for me. So, well, glad to have you here, even if it's just for a bit. Happy to have you guys. Okay, so let's get started. Self-love. We hear people talk about self-love all the time. I know that probably long before I even was doing my own healing, I heard the idea of self-love. Also the idea that we can't love others unless we love ourselves first or something along that line. And I thought, okay, that I guess kind of makes sense. I didn't really know what that meant exactly, but thought, okay, I guess that kind of makes sense in a way. And then after kind of doing my own healing and doing this work over the years with different people, kind of in different stages, I guess, of self-love, just kind of having a little bit of a different view maybe, or a different experience in what self-love is. And so I thought it would be helpful to talk about this because we do hear that all the time. And I think people do the things that they're supposed to do to love themselves, but still struggle with feeling like they love themselves. So I wanted to talk about it because it kind of encompasses a lot of different things. It really impacts certainly worthiness, shame, how we show up in relationships, our ability to give of ourselves and our love from a place of pure openness versus fear. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. But as I was thinking about talking about this today, one of the things that came to mind is I did a book group a handful of years or so ago. And I think it was A New Earth by Eckhart Tolle. And I don't remember the exact conversation, but I remember somehow we were talking about love in relationship. And somebody was sharing how much love she gives to other people, how much she loves like her child or children. And I think it came from kind of this idea that if you don't love yourself, then you can't really love others. And she was in disagreement with that. And again, I don't remember the exact context, but that's not necessarily that important. But I remember that in what I was saying really did not sit well with her. Understandably, this isn't a judgment, but it really kind of was a little bit of a trigger for her, because I think she felt that I was suggesting that maybe she didn't actually love her child or children, and that wasn't the case. But it was interesting, just kind of that reaction. And so as I was thinking about that, just thinking about what that really means, because I think for most survivors, we often do love, we give, we sacrifice, we empathize. We tend to be kind of very good at that. But we tend to do it from a closed place, not from an open place. And this, again, this isn't judgment. This is just the reality. And what I mean by closed place or space within us is that there is so much uncertainty. There's so much fear. There's so much unworthiness underneath it all, that when we love, we have difficulty feeling, just allowing ourselves to be in that space of love, because we fear losing it or losing them. We fear that if they really knew us, then our love wouldn't mean anything to them. We fear not being enough for them. We love, we do, out of a fear of not being accepted or being judged or feeling guilty. We do things out of obligation. So that's not to say that you can't genuinely love somebody and want to be there for them. Of course, that can be true. But under that, because of course, going back to the idea of core beliefs, under that drives how we ultimately end up feeling, how secure we feel, how much trust we have. So self-love isn't just about how do we love ourselves. It impacts everything, particularly close relationships that we have in our lives, but it also affects our ability to just kind of show up with the people around us, to be open in terms of sharing what we're thinking or feeling or acknowledging a struggle or a desire. It affects all of that. So the idea of loving yourself, or do I love myself? To be completely honest with you, that doesn't really resonate for me. Calling it self-love feels fluffy and like a self-development word or something. I don't know. It just doesn't resonate in my being. So what I tend to think about in terms of self-love and being in a place where you can fully show up in your life for yourself and therefore with other people, has much more to do with self-acceptance. Ultimately, I think of self-love being self-acceptance. And part of self-acceptance is self-compassion and self-respect. Those are the pieces of what it means to honor ourselves. So when I think of self-love, it's self-acceptance, but it's also an honoring of ourselves. Do we honor who we are as a human being? Do we honor our desires, our fears, our dreams? Because if we're not, then we certainly don't love ourselves. And if we're not honoring that, when we show up with other people, sacrificing ourselves is not how we love other people. Being fully ourselves, saying no when it doesn't feel in alignment with our heart or our schedule. That is honoring ourselves. And we can, at the same time, honor others in saying no. And when you don't honor yourself, when you don't have self-compassion, self-acceptance, when you don't believe in your worthiness, you have a hard time saying no. Or if no is easy for you, it's coming often from an unhealthy place. Not always. Like, you might say no because it's just a time boundary, or it's a boundary for you and you're just really good with that. So that could certainly be true. But for a lot of people who do not honor themselves, saying no can be sacrifice, or it can be self-protection. Like, somebody invites you to something and you say no, not because you don't like them, not because they're not good for you to be around, not because you don't want to do that thing. You say no because it feels safer to not go. And when you do that, you're dishonoring yourself. You're dishonoring your need for connection, for friendship, for enjoyment. So if we can think about working on honoring ourselves, then all those other pieces that I just mentioned begin to very organically shift. Because when we're honoring ourselves and our needs, how we show up with others naturally changes. How we feel when we engage with somebody else feels very, very different. If we tell somebody, or if we are in a partnership with somebody and we struggle with self-worth, we have a lot of shame, we fear that if that person really knew us or saw us or whatever, that they wouldn't want to be with us, then when we have that moment, when we feel love for that person, not that it's not genuine, I'm not suggesting that it's not, but when we have that, it's often kind of tinged in a way, or what's triggered is a fear of losing them, a fear that maybe they don't really love you, a fear that if they knew you, they wouldn't really love you, a fear that if they see you be vulnerable or sad, they're going to think you're not the person they thought you were, not the person that they fell in love with. And really, if you think about it, like if you take some time and think about how often that happens with friends, with partners, with children, with parents, maybe even a therapist. How often do we feel something positive towards somebody, even if it's like something you're looking forward to in terms of spending time with somebody? How often do you find yourself in some aspect of doubt? Something telling you that they would feel differently if they knew you, or that maybe you shouldn't go because you're just going to bring them down, or that you're safer, or maybe you don't use the word safe, but no, I just want to stay home. I don't really want to go. No, I prefer to just read this book. I never have a good time when I go anyway. And maybe that's true. Maybe you do really enjoy reading. And there's nothing wrong with that. I enjoy reading and I enjoy my alone time. I need my alone time. But the reality is there are times that just feels like the easier and safer option, because we are protecting ourselves. So, how do you get to that place of honoring yourself? Well, this is the healing. And there are steps. There's steps all along the way. You get to make a choice every day and throughout many moments in your day to honor yourself. One of the things that you've probably heard me say many times is that gratitude breeds worthiness, right? And often when I talk about gratitude, I talk about identifying something within yourself that you feel good about. This week, there was a tiny little gratitude challenge that I suggested to identify something a couple of times a day to feel good about. When you do that, you are honoring yourself. I also talk about self-care as healing. This is one of the reasons, because when you take care of yourself, whether that is something like a nice long bath, a nice massage, a nice long walk outside, or setting a boundary and saying no, getting enough sleep. There are so many ways we can take care of ourselves. But when you intentionally choose to take care of yourself, when you do that consciously, you are setting that new pathway that I talked about with core beliefs. When you do that consciously, you are reminding yourself that you are worthy. You are honoring what you need, what you desire. So every moment that you take care of yourself in some way is a way that you're honoring yourself. Every time that you share something that you're afraid to share, that's kind of along the lines of healing. Certainly anything that you feel kind of uncomfortable because you're not sure how that person will respond, or you feel ashamed or whatever. When you honor your desire to share, or when you desire the need to be witnessed, that is healing. That is building within you self-acceptance. When you can forgive yourself for making a mistake, you are honoring that you are human. You're seeing yourself as you see others, as human, as people who make mistakes, as people who you still value and love, even though they make mistakes. Having compassion for yourself is absolutely a necessary component in this. Whether it's about things from your past, whether it's about struggling today, right now in this moment, instead of beating yourself up about it, instead of telling yourself that you shouldn't be struggling, that you're weak, that somebody wouldn't love you if you were struggling, that you should be over it, take a moment, take a breath, and tell yourself that it's okay that you're struggling. Honor that you're struggling. Honor what you need in that moment. Do you need a few moments away from whatever it is you're doing? Would hearing from a friend help you feel connected? Maybe you reach out to them. Maybe even making a little note to yourself where you write out something kind to yourself, the kind of thing that you would write, the kind of message you would send to somebody who is a friend who is struggling. Write that to yourself. Having compassion for whatever it is that you might be dealing with, big or little, is so necessary. It's showing yourself that you are deserving of that. You're honoring whatever that struggle is with kindness and with compassion, with acceptance of that struggle. And it's something that we have to do over and over again. It's not something that we can just make a list of all the ways that we can show ourselves compassion and check it off and, okay, I've done that, and now I'm in a place where I can honor or love myself. It doesn't work that way. We have to keep doing it. And every time that we dismiss our needs or desires, every time we tell ourselves it doesn't matter, that we don't matter, because that's what we're telling ourselves, we are furthering the belief that we are not worthy. We are moving ourselves further away from being able to fully honor ourselves. So being really mindful of the times that you say something that is harsh to yourself. Noticing the times that your body needs something and you ignore it, or maybe even criticize or judge it. We do that a lot, especially as survivors of physical and sexual abuse. We tend to be very disconnected from our bodies. We tend to feel disappointed in our bodies. We have to be able to honor and respect what our bodies need in order to get to that place. We can't just learn to kind of love ourselves without honoring and respecting our bodies. We have to be connected to our bodies. We have to be able to recognize what our body needs, what our body is feeling, and so often what our body is crying out for. So the path to self-love, the path to true, authentic, and deep connection, the path to freedom, is learning a deep honoring, experiencing this deep honoring of who you are as a human being, not despite what you've experienced or how you've struggled, not despite it, but because of it. Honor what it took you to get to this place in your life, no matter what that looks like, even if it's a struggle to get out of bed every day. Even if you're engaging in behaviors that you're not proud of and that maybe even add to the level of shame that you experience, you can still feel proud of where you are in this moment. Again, not despite any of that, but because of that. Think about that for a moment. When you're really struggling, and yet you choose to show up, that's not an easy thing to do. In fact, a lot of people don't. A lot of people aren't able to. And when I say show up, I'm not talking about watching this video or commenting. Of course, that's part of it. It's certainly acceptable and welcome. But it's showing up for yourself. It's showing up in your own life. It's trying to take a moment to take care of yourself, to honor yourself. So, if self-love feels like this far off or ridiculous thing that will never happen for you, and like I said, for me, I don't think that I would define how I see myself, feel about myself as self-love specifically. That just doesn't resonate for me. But I do have a complete and full acceptance of myself. It certainly doesn't mean that I always, 100% of the time, honor my needs, my desires, because that's not always possible. And there are times that I struggle a little bit more with that. But it means that overall, we value who we are. We believe that we have something because of who we are, not what we do for other people, but we have value because of who we are. We can see the qualities within us that we also see in others, that we love them for, that we respect them for, that we honor them for. So I'd like you to think about, after watching this video, what can you do today, right in that moment? What can you do to honor yourself? Try to make it a daily practice where maybe every day you start your day thinking about, what can I do to honor myself today? Eating when you're hungry, taking a bathroom break, getting something to drink when you're thirsty, or even if you're not, but you know that you tend to not drink enough water. Reaching out to a friend when you're struggling, or just to say hi. Resting when you need to. Getting up and moving your body if you haven't been doing that much. And moving your body could mean walking from one end of the house to the other. And when you're struggling, however you're struggling, having compassion for that. The same way that you would have compassion for somebody else. So, are you willing to take on that challenge? If you do, I really can confidently say, there's very little that I promise, but I really can very confidently say that if you make a practice of that, being conscious daily about finding moments when you can honor yourself and doing it consciously. You have to be able to do it consciously, because there are things that you're doing to take care of yourself all the time. Well, much of the time anyway. But if you're not doing it consciously, then it doesn't register. We need to be able to experience it within our entire being. And we can only do that if it's a conscious experience. So if you are able to be aware of when you're taking care of your needs, especially if it's something that's not particularly easy to do, it literally changes you on a physiological cellular level, because you're sending love, you're sending compassion, you're sending a different energy into your heart, into your belly, and into your cells. So let's practice that together. I'm going to think about a way that I've already honored myself today in different ways, but I'm going to be thinking about that today. I'm going to be paying a little bit of attention to, what do I feel like I want right now? Doesn't always have to be what you need. What you want matters too. So join me on identifying how we can honor ourselves day after day, making a regular practice out of that. And it can be something big, like taking a really nice vacation. It could be setting a boundary, which is also really big and not an easy thing to do. A vacation might be a lot easier. Or something really small. Taking a few deep breaths is a really helpful way to honor yourself, especially if you're feeling stressed. So let's work on this together. Thanks for joining me. Okay, so let's get into questions and comments. I'm glad you've been watching regularly. Again, I'm not going to be saying names because I'm going to share this publicly. So thank you for watching. It's been really, I will say that it's been a little bit of a challenge. to kind of figure out what am I going to talk about and what am I going to say about it and all of that. But it's been good. I'm pushing myself. But what has been really nice is being able to actually connect with people in real time, and then also certainly any comments that end up coming up. Wow, a lot of people have ended up jumping on. So does anybody have any questions or comments or thoughts that you'd like to share? I'd be happy to stay on and continue this conversation, because there are a lot of good things that you guys end up bringing up that I think are also helpful for people who are currently on, but also as people watch the replay, even as people watch a replay a year from now. Maybe it's somebody totally new to their healing, and watching, being able to hear the kinds of questions or the ideas that people come up with as they share is really helpful to people as they are in this process, no matter where they are in this process. No, it definitely doesn't come naturally. And part of that is kind of related to core beliefs as well, or certainly related to core beliefs. It doesn't come naturally. One of the biggest reasons, because we don't believe that we're worthy. That's one of the biggest reasons that it doesn't come naturally. And we are also so disconnected from what we want and desire, especially as survivors of childhood abuse, because you're actually taught by what you've experienced that what you want doesn't matter, how you feel doesn't matter. And in many aspects, actually, as a way of coping, taught to shut down any thought of what you might want or how you might feel, as a way of literally surviving. Because if you allowed yourself to think about, I don't want this, I want this instead, it would be devastating. Literally, when I say survival, I mean that in a very literal sense much of the time. So getting to a place where we understand what we want, what we need, and to be completely honest with you, there are times that I struggle with really identifying what I want. What I need, I think I'm a little bit better at, but sometimes I am not quite sure what I want. It's hard for me to just kind of connect with that, and not because I don't feel worthy of it. It's just not a natural experience. So it takes very conscious effort to be able to do that. But we are literally taught to disregard what we think and what we feel. Our needs don't matter. So it does need to be a very conscious thing. And that's one of the things about working in therapy, is that through that process, even when you are completely unaware, just by talking about things that seem kind of unrelated, your needs end up being met. Your desires in many aspects, not all of them, of course, but many of your needs, many of your desires end up being met without you having to be actually aware that that's happening. And yes, I did say just a little bit ago that we need to do it consciously, but when you're in this healing process, which takes quite a bit of time, you can begin with having things happen that aren't specifically intentional or conscious. And then over time, you learn to build kind of a sense of trust, or even feeling like it's okay. Like if you're going into a therapist and you can express how you feel, or even if you don't know how you feel, but you can express that, then on a level, you're experiencing that it's safe. So even if consciously you're not saying to yourself, okay, it's safe for me to express this, you're experiencing it anyway. And then over time, maybe you become aware, maybe it's an actual conversation that, oh, yes, it is safe for me to express this. I've been able to express this, or I've been able to share this, and nothing bad happens. So you become more conscious as time goes on, but it absolutely is not natural. And that's part of the real struggle with it, is that we have to make it a very intentional experience, which is really hard to do because changing any habit is not easy. Changing a habit that goes against the grain of believing that we're unworthy is even harder. And it takes time and consistent effort to be able to do that. So healing is not for those who give up easily. That's for sure. But you wouldn't be here listening to this video if you were somebody who gave up easily. You wouldn't be here listening to this video or watching this video if you were somebody that didn't have a tremendous amount of determination and resilience. So if you're watching this, you're already there. Self-care is difficult for me as a caregiver for others. Yeah. And sometimes being a caregiver is something that we need to do. We have to do it. We don't have a choice. And sometimes it's something that we also like to do. Maybe both of those things can be true at the same time. But it's in some ways even more important that if we are caregiving for somebody else, that we intentionally make time to take care of ourselves. Because when we are taking care of somebody else, whether it's children or an aging parent, or just we tend to caretake everybody around us, or even like as a teacher, in many aspects, you're a caretaker. But when we tend to do that, not only do we not kind of focus on ourselves, we don't have the time, we don't have the energy, whatever, to kind of focus on ourselves, we perpetuate the idea that our value is taking care of others. So we have to be even more mindful about carving out time and space to take care of ourselves. Even as we're taking care of somebody else, taking moments here or there to take a break and take some deep breaths, or to take a little bit of a break and go take a walk, or making a plan for after you're no longer specifically in that environment that is maybe a little bit more stressful or so focused on somebody else, that you take some deliberate time afterwards to do something for yourself. And maybe that's pure relaxation, or maybe it's going out and having a laugh with people. It could look a lot of different ways, but you do have to be very intentional about that. One of the things, I think this is a fairly commonly known thing, but if you think about like people who are adults, so, and taking care of other adults, so not like a parent or a grandparent taking care of children, but an adult who is caretaking another adult, especially if they are sick and they need a lot of care, quite often the caretaker will end up sick. If the person they're taking care of is kind of at the end of their life or moving in that direction, oftentimes the caretaker will end up developing something, or even potentially dying before the person that they're taking care of. That isn't just coincidence. It's because they're not taking care of themselves. We need, as caretakers especially, we need to set aside time, even if we tend to just caretake a partner, or we tend to be a caretaker at a work environment. Well, that's a boundary thing, and you might want to step back from that a little bit. Or if you're caretaking your friends, that's a boundary thing, and you probably would be good for you to take a step back from that as well. But of course, there are certain relationships that we are the primary caretaker. So you have to be very deliberate about setting some time around that, and even setting boundaries. If you are a primary caretaker, It's important not to be the primary caretaker 24/7. Maybe bringing somebody else in so that they can take some responsibility during a period of time so that you can release some of that. I know it's impossible to feel like you can fully release it, but at least release some of it so that you can have time to yourself in whatever way that might look. It is necessary for our well-being. Listening to my meditations really help. Thank you for saying that. As I was talking about the honoring ourselves and honoring our bodies, I actually thought about the meditation on learning, or I don't even remember now what the name of the meditation is, but about connecting to your body, learning to honor and love your body. I thought about that one. And I think, and also even where you are now. And again, I don't remember the name of that meditation, but that one I think is really helpful for compassion, for acceptance of where you are now. So if you are watching this on replay or on YouTube, I will share a link to that meditation album. But there's learning to connect with your body and honor your body, honoring where you are now as well, and creating a sense of safety within yourself and your surroundings, which is also helpful in a lot of different ways. But I will try to share that, remember to share that. Self-care feels like being selfish. Yes, this is something that I think a lot of people struggle with. And I think as women, again, this is a very general statement, men struggle with this too. But as women, we are conditioned from very, very, very early on. We are conditioned to take care of others. When you are abused, that is an additional conditioning. Again, that we don't matter and other people's desires and needs matter. That other people always come before we do. If we come at all. That other people matter and we don't. And of course, we don't just translate that to people who are trying to hurt us. That just becomes the kind of a core belief about the world around us. You know, you've heard me probably talk about a belief about who we are and the world around us. So that would be an example of both who we are, that we're undeserving, that we don't matter, but also an example of what we believe about the world around us. And that would be that other people matter and we don't. That there's an expectation that other people's needs and desires are to be honored and we are not. And then here you talk about religious upbringing, and that certainly adds to it. So when you've got like overt conditioning, like somebody is telling you that you have to take care of other people, that you should put yourself last, and that being a good human being means that you always put other people first or whatever, then those are actual voices in your head. It's not just your voice, it's other people's voices that you hear over and over again that obviously are going to reinforce that idea. So not that it necessarily takes more to undo that, but it definitely adds layers of undoing that. And then especially if it's a religious idea, there are so many other aspects that are tied into that it can take a lot longer and more intentional effort over time to be able to let that go, to accept that you can be loved by whomever, or go to heaven or whatever, to accept that can happen if you're taking care of yourself. So that can definitely take a little bit more work and even some specific effort to undo those ideas. Yeah, being more intentional. And that's, I think, one of the kind of just a really important piece of healing in general, and self-care, but really about healing is that it only, let's see, how do I want to say this? We can do lots of different things towards healing, but if we're not consciously aware that we're doing it or how it's affecting us, or even the purpose of it, then we don't internalize it. It completely kind of just goes right by us, and we're not really taking it in. So it doesn't really register. We don't experience it as a healing thing. Again, it doesn't mean that it's not still maybe having some benefit, but we have to be aware. We have to be able to experience what it feels like emotionally and physiologically, for us to really fully grasp and change what we believe, change what we anticipate or how we see our relationships and the world around us. And that's not an easy thing to do, because most of us are not very conscious in our day-to-day lives. We just go through the motions, right? We're not very present as a species, really. Just generally, we're not. And I would say that in cultures that have valued money and kind of prestige or success, that is even more the case. So working on being present, and it's one of the reasons that I talk so often about just taking a few breaths, connecting with your breath, because that is one of the easiest ways to work on becoming present. And we can do it anytime, no matter what's going on. We don't need a lot of time. We don't need time to ourselves. We can do it pretty much in any given moment. And it's just about being present. Brought up as a socialist, that's an interesting kind of way to think about that in our political environment here in the US, and I know other places as well. That's interesting. I'm just thinking about the political ramifications of that. Who am I to think that my needs are more important than someone else? Thank you for saying that. So, this is really important. Honoring yourself, honoring your needs and your desires doesn't mean that you are more important than somebody else. So I'm kind of just thinking about this in this particular context. I know that's what it feels like, and that's even what I think a lot of people would maybe even kind of describe it as. But I think taking care of ourselves, even if you think about the idea of socialism, we are not necessarily taking care of ourselves at the expense of somebody else. We are just making sure that our needs are also being met. Because somebody else, their needs, their desires are being met by them and by others around them. If we are not honoring our needs, we can't fully honor somebody else's. It's kind of that idea that you can't pour from an empty cup, I think is the saying. And I think in many ways that's true, but we do it anyway, right? We're constantly giving, even when we're not taking care of ourselves. But how does that leave you feeling? And I think that that's the difference. We cannot be healthy and pour from an empty cup. I think we do it all the time, but it's not from a healthy place. If we're doing it from a healthy place, then our needs, we have to be on a level playing field. So this idea, I think, is really significant, something that a lot of people have an idea of. And it kind of goes along with that selfishness, right? That it's taking care of yourself is being self-centered or selfish or whatever. And the idea is that you're doing it at the expense of somebody else, but you're not. Honoring that you need time away doesn't mean that you're never there for somebody else. Honoring that you have a desire for pizza when your partner wants Thai isn't being selfish, because you probably, well, maybe you don't take turns. Maybe it's always what the other person wants. But being healthy, especially in a relationship, means that it's give and take. So honoring yourself in whatever way that looks, putting children down for a nap so you can have 20 minutes or 30 minutes to take your own nap, to shower, to call up a friend. That isn't being selfish. It's kind of killing two birds with one stone. It's that your kids really may need a nap, right? You probably are going to put them down for a nap at some point. Or you give them something specific to play, or maybe you set up a play date or something like that so that you can give yourself a little bit of a break. It's not selfish. It's taking care of yourself while their needs are also being met, whether it's sleep or playtime. So let's work on changing how we say that. Taking care of yourself isn't at the expense of somebody else. You can take care of yourself, honor yourself, while you're also honoring others. Maybe not in that very moment, but maybe 20 minutes later, maybe the next day. Nobody else's needs, unless you are a parent or responsible for childcare, nobody else's needs come before yours. They don't. Now, there may be times that, depending on what they're needing, that may be more, I can't really think of the word I'm looking for. Like in that moment, that may need to come first. What matters is that they're not always coming first. Like if a child falls and hurts themselves, and you were trying to do a 5-minute meditation because you really needed a break, well, yes, that child's needs in that moment may come first. But then you come back another time to that meditation. Or if you're really having a stressful day and you just need some time to yourself and a friend calls, you don't necessarily have to answer the phone. It's okay to take those 5 minutes or those 20 minutes and call your friend back. It's okay to do that. Now, if you know that you have a friend who is struggling, or let's say you are enjoying reading and you get a text from a friend and you look at it and it's not important and you think, okay, I want to finish this chapter before I call or before I message this person back. There's nothing wrong with that. That's perfectly okay. In fact, I think it's probably healthy to do that. If you're engaged in something, if you're into something, finish that and then respond. Now, if you get a text from a friend or somebody and they're saying, hey, do you have a minute? I'd really like to run something by you. Or, hey, do you have a minute? I'm really struggling right now. If it feels okay to you and it's coming from a place of oh, I hope everything's okay. I can come back to this later. Yes, I'm here for you. It's okay to do that. That can be a very healthy thing to do. What is different when it's unhealthy is that you're doing it from that place of, oh, I have to do this. What would it say about me if I didn't? I'm a bad person if I don't respond right away. Because doing it from that place, it doesn't mean that you wouldn't still do it, or even potentially shouldn't still do it as a good friend. But it's important to recognize that what's driving it, this goes kind of back to what I was saying before, that what's driving it is from a closed space. It's coming from a place of obligation, of fear of judgment, even your own. It's not coming from that place of love and of openness. And that's the difference. It doesn't mean you can't still be a great friend if it's coming from a closed place, but you're doing it at the expense of yourself, which is unhealthy. And of course, there are going to be times when we have people in our lives that we care about that we may sacrifice sleep, for example, to be there for a friend. And there's nothing inherently wrong with that if it's coming from a healthy place. If you're making a conscious choice because this friend is somebody that you care about, and this friend, you want to be there to support them. But if you're doing that every day or every night, if you're sacrificing your sleep or your well-being or your other relationships, then that's not healthy. And it's important to set some limits, some boundaries around that. Now, if your friend is going through a particularly difficult time, then, and it doesn't feel like you're sacrificing too much, or you're not doing it at your own expense of your health or your well-being, then maybe there's a period of time that you do that. But another thing that's important about this is that friend also there for you when you need them? Do you reach out to that friend when you're struggling? Because if you're not, then it's not a level relationship. It's not an equal relationship. So in that sense, it's at your own expense because you're not, there's no give and take. Healthy relationships are about give and take. Yes, we give, but we also have to be willing to receive. If it's just one-sided, it's not healthy. Now, of course, when you have children, it's a little different. So that's a whole different issue. Or if you are caretaking, like a parent or somebody who is sick or something like that, obviously it's going to be a little bit different. But I'm talking about more generally just relationships. All relationships, co-working relationships, I would say probably similar. Boss-employee relationship, there's a difference there. But generally with relationships, whether it's a partnership, a friendship, or even a family relationship, adult family relationships, it's important to recognize how equal the relationship is, the give and take in the relationship. Even as a parent of adult children, you're likely going to give a little bit more, generally. But it shouldn't be sacrificing yourself to be able to do it. Like this is my personal thought about it, and this is based on psychology and relationships and all of that. As parents, even when our children are adults, it shouldn't necessarily be an equal relationship. We shouldn't be going to them when we're struggling with stuff, especially not if it's a relationship issue with a partner. That's my personal feeling about it. That's where we would reach out to friends or somebody. But it's still kind of give and take. Like, we're not always just giving to our children as adults, as they're adults, but they never call to check on us, or they never reach out to us if it's our birthday or just to say hi or whatever. Like if it's just a one-sided relationship, that's not really a relationship. Healthy relationships need to have give and take. And there will be times, if it's a long-term relationship, there will be times that you're giving a lot more than you're receiving. But as time goes on, there should also be times when you're receiving maybe more than you're giving, even if it's because you're going through a period when you're not feeling well physically. So that person kind of steps up and helps you out a little bit. And that's true for friendships too, whether it's an emotional not feeling well or a physical not feeling well. But it's give and take, and it ebbs and it flows. So a healthy relationship, healthy honoring of ourselves and others is not ever, should never be at our own expense. And it really isn't at the expense of others. So I'm really glad that you brought this up, because I think that this is an important piece of this conversation, but I also think it's an important concept, I think, in general, that we have this idea that it is either or. This goes back to the patterns of thinking, right? That it's either for our benefit or it's for somebody else's, that it can't be both. And that is absolutely not true. So thank you for bringing that. Feel like you need to earn your own respect. That's an interesting thing. If you think about what makes you respect other people that are close to you in your life, what have they really done specifically to earn your respect? My guess is that it's probably nothing specific that they've done. Like they didn't set out to do something in particular as a way to earn respect, whether it was a conscious or unconscious thing. You probably respect them because of who they are, because of how they show up in the world, because of how they make you feel just by being who they are, not because of everything they do for you, but because of who they are. You probably respect them for how they treat other people. Respect their kind of innate strengths and capabilities. Apply that to yourself. You don't have to do anything different to be respected by yourself or other people. Even identifying what other people respect about you or appreciate about you might be a different way to think about that. Like about you. Maybe try to trust that those things could actually be true. And acknowledge that within yourself. But I feel pretty confident that I can say absolutely that none of us need to do anything additional in order to be able to respect and honor ourselves. We may need to look at things about ourselves differently to honor and respect ourselves, but we certainly don't need to do anything differently. We don't need to be anybody differently. Now, we could choose to work on showing up differently, potentially, in a way that feels more in alignment with our own needs and desires. That actually is maybe an important piece of that. But I don't think that we need to do anything or be anything, certainly, different in order to be able to honor and respect ourselves. I'm okay being selfish more often now. I like doing things for myself. So by definition, kind of focusing on yourself and taking time for yourself kind of is selfish, I guess. And I don't like that. I don't like acknowledging that, because just the connotation around the word selfish is contrary to taking care of yourself being a good thing. But it is absolutely necessary. it is absolutely necessary for all of us to be healthy and happy and whole. We have to take time for ourselves. And in order for us to begin to believe in our worthiness, we must also take time for ourselves and take care of ourselves in lots of different ways. And as you feel more worthy, as you realize that it's okay to take care of yourself, you tend to do it a little bit more often. And when you do it, you do feel better. You might have to struggle a little bit with getting past the guilt, which is another reason why kind of working with a therapist can be helpful with that. Because when we start getting caught up in guilt, it automatically triggers shame. But it's really hard to move out of that. And so if you're saying, okay, I need to take care of myself, so I'm going to do it, but you're really struggling with all the feelings and the thoughts around guilt, then it's almost counterproductive in a way. So it's important to be able to process and release the guilt that you're experiencing around that. So that's an important point as well. And I love that when you're able to start doing that and you're seeing that it feels different and you're honoring yourself, because when you honor yourself, it actually does feel really good. It really does feel good. And when you can recognize that and connect in with that, that's part of the freedom that I talk about. Hey, everybody. Welcome. So thank you guys for bringing that up, because again, you know, when you make comments and ask questions and stuff, it really helps me go a little bit deeper or further into whatever it is that I'm talking about, which I think are important pieces as or just in sharing things related to this, because I don't script this out, so I just kind of go wherever my mind is taking me. So this is really helpful. So a book, Dr. Henry Cloud and John Townsend, in a boundaries book, differentiate between selfishness and self-centeredness. Yeah, self-centeredness, I think, would be kind of that idea of at the expense of other people. So not caring about other people around you. Like, for example, let me think of something. Like having a few people around and you want something and it doesn't matter what other people want, and you just want it to be the way that you want it to be. That I think of as being self-centered. Sharing what you desire is not being selfish, because hopefully other people are also sharing that. Or if 3 people are there and you're choosing what to have for dinner and everybody's sharing their opinion, and it ends up being what you want, that's not being selfish, and it's certainly not being self-centered. But if it's always what you want, then that is being self-centered. But sharing what it is that you want, or if it's like a potluck kind of thing and you're bringing what you want, that's not a bad thing, and it's not being self-centered. So yeah, I think that thinking of those being 2 different things, self-centered versus, and I don't know how they talk about it, but self-centered is definitely, for me, I don't think that self-centered is really ever probably a healthy thing. But taking care of yourself is always a healthy thing. Because even like, for example, the example that I gave about a friend calling you in the middle of the night or whatever, you know, maybe you're sacrificing some sleep to be with that person in that moment, but you're not always, but as long as you're not always doing something like that at your own expense, as long as you are taking care of yourself and maybe even taking a nap that next day, or making sure that, and not that it's up to you to make sure, but if you're the only person that person ever calls, kind of setting a limit or creating a boundary and offering other suggestions for that person, other people that they can call. Or if you've had a really rough day yourself, being able to say, I want to be here for you, but if I'm not available, can you reach out to this other person? Maybe it's a mutual friend, or maybe it's somebody that they know, maybe it's their therapist or whatever. But you can do both of those things. But it's a practice. It is definitely a practice of kind of setting those limits and recognizing what your own needs are, and kind of playing around with that a little bit and dealing with whatever guilt comes up, because I can almost guarantee that there will be some guilt that comes up in some way or another, whether you feel like you're being selfish, you feel like you're letting somebody down, unworthiness or shame is really triggered. You will likely struggle with guilt as you're working your way through this. So it's important to acknowledge that, to have compassion for that, while also acknowledging that there's nothing to feel guilty about. But that takes a lot of effort. Like, there's a lot of work sometimes that has to be done, healing work that has to be done around that in order to be able to let go of the guilt. One of the things that comes up a lot in my work with people, and this is actually kind of a boundary thing that I could have brought up yesterday, but one of the things that comes up a lot in my work with people is the struggle around setting boundaries, especially with like family members or friends that you've had for a long time, is knowing that not setting a boundary means that you are going to be hurt. Maybe in a really significant way, maybe in just a way that you're that somebody just isn't being very nice, or that you're being taken advantage of. And of course, part of healing is learning to set those boundaries, following through with them, so that you're not putting yourself in situations that you end up leaving feeling badly in some way. So one of the things that I will say to people often is that what's important right now, and of course, depending on where we are in the process, but what's important right now is that you set that boundary. We together in this process can work on the guilt. We can work through the guilt that you're feeling. We can work through the shame that comes up. We can work through dealing with all the hurtful things that person is going to say to push back against that boundary. We can process that and work through it much easier than the impact that being hurt over and over again, or being devalued over and over again, adds to your life. We can work on that in this process much easier than adding to the level of hurt and betrayal that you might end up experiencing. And I'm not even talking about abuse happening. I'm just talking about your time not being valued, your needs not being respected, you not being respected, being hurt by somebody saying hurtful things to you. When that happens over and over again, there's more healing that you have to do around that. It adds to it. Working through the guilt is easier in many ways. It's not easy, but it's more doable in those moments than adding to the level of hurt or betrayal that is there. And that's a really important thing as well. I'm just making a note to identify that we ended up talking about this, because I think it is an important piece as well. Yeah, so selfishness is using good stewardship of yourself and your needs. self-centeredness is at the cost of others. I think that's I think that's generally a really good way to think about that. I'm so glad that this feels like it is resonating for you. And please do, I ended up talking in the Q&A part. So the me talking was the first about 30 minutes. And then the Q&A part started after that. And there are a couple of really important pieces that I ended up talking about as a result of some of the things that came up from people. And dealing with guilt was one of them, and also at the expense of other people was also a really important piece of the conversation. So thank you again for bringing those things up and making this, I think, a really really important conversation to have overall. And when I decided to do this, when I even decided to do this at 10 o'clock this morning, I still wasn't quite sure what I was going to talk about. And I have to be honest, I feel like it just flows through me much more naturally when I don't plan for it too much. Which is part of the difficulty I have with being consistent with videos, because when I have these moments of inspiration, if I don't do it right then I feel like it's kind of gone. Not that it's not still important or that I couldn't find some way to talk about it, but it just feels like that moment has passed, which is just why doing it kind of live and then being able to kind of play off of, in a sense, feeling into the energy of the people that are watching, I find so helpful. So thank you all for joining me for this conversation on thinking of self-love in a different way, that it's self-honoring, self-acceptance, being able to appreciate who we are in the world, really just honoring ourselves in all aspects and all ways. So thank you, everybody, for being here. If you are watching this on replay, please let me know that you're watching this. If you are watching this on YouTube, this was a Facebook Live in my Courageous Warrior group, and I will leave a link for that in the description as well. And please leave thoughts, questions, comments in the comments below, and I will look forward to connecting with you again soon. Thank you, everybody, for being here. See you next time.